Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this episode, this broadcast. Mark DeJesus here, bringing you insights for your healing and freedom journey. I'm passionate about helping believers walk in greater mental, emotional, and relationship health. And if this video is a blessing to your life, go to markdejesus.com, sign up for our email newsletter so you can be updated on any future resources and materials. There's a topics page where you can look up specific topics for your journey. There's a books page that you can see all the books I've written and take advantage of online courses as well. Also, please be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and any other place that you see my materials, and you can be updated with future events, future broadcasts. I like doing live Q&As, and you can be aware of those when they're happening as well. Today, what I want to talk about is more on the subject of perfectionism. I found in the journey in writing my upcoming book on obsessive compulsive, there was this whole area of perfectionism that has been a big part of my journey. And I felt this branch out of material that I wanted to share, spend some time talking about. I'm sure it's going to be part of maybe a future book or more material and things like that. But I just know that the things I'm bringing out here and healing the heart of a perfectionist are so important. So today, what I want to get into is healing the stress response. We're going to talk about a perfectionist and the stress that they are under and what we can begin to do about that. This is about my own healing journey too, and what I've learned and those that I've been able to help on a regular basis. So let's talk about healing the stress response of a perfectionist. When I talk about perfectionism, I help people to understand it better by realizing perfectionism is the mindset of just right, but never enough. Just right, but never enough. Just right, never enough. Just right, never enough. We kind of keep chasing that, and we get locked into a cycle. And it may take some time for you to realize that you follow perfectionism, you have perfectionistic tendencies. It may be you're a type A perfectionist. It may be you have perfectionistic influences. It may be you have obsessive compulsive tendencies, which people who struggle with OCD have perfectionism influencing within their framework of how they deal with thoughts, emotions, and life in general. We need healing to our stress response. There's a lot of stress, a lot of disturbance. Perfectionists are very, very disturbed. And you may find yourself in a place where you realize you're a procrastinator and perfectionism is influencing that. You can be passive. You never take risks. You can self-sabotage. You can be self-critical. You're critical of others. That come out of how you are critical to yourself. You may be type A, you may be OCD. Perfectionism is certainly on a spectrum. But what we need to talk about is how you get stressed out, how you deal with stress, and how you think within yourself that actually creates stress. So when we talk about stress, we often mention the fight or flight system. Now, when it comes to fight or flight, there's also areas that people in psychology, self-help acknowledge. There's a fawn or freeze type of stage that's there as well too. I'm not negating those, but I typically bring it down to the fight or flight because perfectionists have, I believe, both in operation. There's a stress response where you either fight, you gear up to take on something, or you get out of there in flight. It's a natural response God designed in your body for certain circumstances where you need to run from a bear, flee from danger, deal with something, a momentary stress, and then your body calms down. You come back to what's called homeostasis. You begin to recover, and your body system was designed to help you recover. Well, perfectionists have a constant fight. We would say fight or flight. I'm going to say fight and flight that's going on. They are in a regular world of living in both at the same time. And they have this fight and flight system on. It's always turned on, and it's actually stuck in the on position. And they don't know how to relax or how to settle. This is often built out of childhood. It's developed very early on in life, and they developed a perfectionistic bend in how they cope with things. I got to follow this just right kind of mindset. And it comes out of brokenness, a lack of unconditional love, coping to stress of trauma growing up, or just simple neglect. Perfectionists are highly emotionally neglected. They have a major theme of neglect in certain areas or many areas or most areas in their life. And they have to recognize that emotional neglect drove perfectionism as a trait and how they cope and how they relate. So let's talk about the first one. I'm going to talk about fight, and then I want to talk about flight. Fight is the terminology of being geared up. You understand what I mean when I say geared up? It's like in a machine, the gears engage, and it starts movement, right? So someone who's in fight, constant fight, they are geared up to always confront a disturbance. It can move into a place where they're very regularly hypervigilant, where they're constantly not only seeking to fight out something, they're looking for something, they're checking for it. They're always geared up in their daily routine. They don't know how to settle. And so this involves a bunch of constants constantly happening. One of the things is they're constantly thinking and overthinking. They don't just think, they ruminate. Ruminate, spin, spin, spin. They have the spin cycle constantly on, doesn't turn off. They don't know how to sit in nothing mode. Meaning, are you able to have times where you're sitting and you're not thinking about a bunch of things, racing through a bunch of things, where you're thinking about not much, or you're just slowly moving through thoughts? Because folks, your brain needs breaks, and sleep at night can't be the only time you take a break from thinking. And so for perfectionists, they're constantly thinking, they're overthinking. When they are not thinking, they're thinking about thinking. So second thing is they're constantly evaluating. They're looking for things that are not just right. There's a checking, looking for things. And so you get stuck in your heads. Those of you that say, you're obsessive, or you recognize perfectionism, you realize you're stuck in your head all the time. And it's hard to connect to your heart, because connecting to our heart is a slower rhythm. It's vulnerable. It's more relational. It's more learning how to connect, even though we're flawed, learning to see our weaknesses, learning to see our mistakes, learning to see and not condemning ourselves, learning to learn through them. You're stuck in your head. And that is a defense mechanism when it's done chronic over and over again, because we're always evaluating something. We're in constant doing. Can't sit still. The moment you have a perfectionist sit down, they have something that they got to think about or solve, and then they got to get up and get busy to do something about it. When the perfectionist isn't doing and they try to stop for a moment, something comes up and they're thinking, and now they're spinning. So they may not be physically doing something, but now they're back in that overthinking. And perfectionists can look at other people that have more of a slower pace in their journey, more grounded pace, and they can get annoyed with them. What's wrong with these people? Hurry up. What's going on? You can have that feeling on the road. Notice you're driving. Notice your timing during the day in meetings. Notice when you have someone who arrives a little late, or you have interruptions in timing. Notice how we respond. There's a big annoyance that goes on, right? So you're in constant fixing mode. You can't rest or be content, because there's an underlying belief that drives your thinking that things need to be just right. And if I do that, I'll be able to settle. I'll be able to settle in peace and in greater love, but it's a trap, because you're always led to something else. You keep chasing disturbances. This keeps you in your fight mode. Are you noticing already where your gloves are always on? You're always boxing something. And so it also leads us to something where perfectionists are constantly blaming. And let me explain what I mean when I say blaming. There's a sense where they feel the right to blame. They have a list of reasons why certain areas aren't happening and why certain things aren't moving forward. They have certain stories they cycle through, and they talk about even in their intimate relationships where all their irritations are irritated at their spouse, they're irritated at their friends, and they can cycle through certain statements. If only I had more money, if only I had more connections, if only I had better friends, if only I had a better spouse, if only I had what this person has, if only God would, if people would only, if I just had the right, so we get into this where we blame situations, we blame God, we blame others, but in reality, there's a sense where we're blaming ourselves. We don't like ourselves. And that's really the anger of that is coming out. So there's some fight problems of a perfectionist. The first thing is that they're constantly exhausted. That's a theme in their life. It's internal exhaustion. The way they live inside produces an exhausting existence. They're in constant go modes. They respond to stress by revving up the engines. When there are times when stress happens, we actually need to move in the opposite direction. We got to gear up, because our life tells us, you got to stress up, you got to stress up. And many times we see, even in the life of Jesus, where they wanted to pull him into a stress mode, he'd actually move in the opposite direction. And so this becomes a deeply wired pattern of a stress response. They become addicted to busyness, to the buzz of busyness, because it distracts from other areas, needs of their heart, brokenness, things that are of great importance. The buzz blocks it out. So what I've found in my life and in the life of others, we often don't deal with some of the core issues of our heart until we crash, right? Then it's like, oh goodness, you contact a counselor, I need help. Then you don't stick with it. Stay with the journey, because then it gets messy and it gets uncomfortable. As soon as it gets uncomfortable, out. And problems with this fight mode is they're tough to be around because they can be edgy, they can be argumentative, they don't relax, and it stresses other people out. They have this inward hostility, and that leads me to the anger thing that's here on the slide. They have this anger. It may come out towards others. They do a really good job of holding it inside, but then boom, this anger comes out and they feel the shame for manifesting the anger, right? But their stress is driven by an internal combustion out of self-anger. Reality is they don't have a good relationship with themselves. And so they can blame it on you or whatever, but it's really about how they see themselves. And out of that anger, they can be very controlling. They want to control, make things just right, control their thoughts, control their emotions, control you, right? So out of that, they can become very demanding as well. They don't see themselves as demanding. It takes time for me to bring out, hey, you got perfectionistic tendencies. It can take a while for somebody to come to terms. And so it's patient just you have to have patience just to recognize it. But they are very demanding of themselves, very demanding of God, very demanding of others. So that's the fight aspect. Let me talk to you about the flight aspect. This is the avoidance now. Fight is gear up, striving, right? Flight is avoidance. And it took me some time I thought I was always in the fight stage, but I realized there's a lot of flight aspects to my journey I need to realize as well. The flight is the avoidance. So I'm fighting, but also avoiding at the same time. Sounds strange, but it's true. And what we're avoiding, what a perfectionist is avoiding, is the fear of and the shame of brokenness. So you're avoiding deep shame and fear with chronic busyness, with distractions, fixing. And so perfectionists they live in a striving and driven lifestyle. It's just there's certain areas, it's just pressure, constant pressure. But the pressure is avoiding. The striving is leading you to avoid. You'd think the striving is your fight mode, right? And it is, but the striving is also flight. Because I'm heavily focused on this, and I'm avoiding this. I'm avoiding the fact that I don't feel loved. I don't feel safe. I don't like myself. I could be a number of things. I have difficult battles I'm facing in my life, that I have trauma, I have unhealed pain, there's anxiety there. So we avoid that and dealing with that because there's a disdain for weaknesses and flaws, and we go into striving and being driven. And second part here is you don't address pain and brokenness, but when they do, it usually comes out in two forms: in anger, like an anger outburst, or in a self-pity kind of expression. Self-pity reveals we don't know how to deal with our pain and disappointment in effective ways. It reveals that we've been neglected in that and not equipped. Pity is a very, very clear sign of that. And perfectionists have been deeply neglected. So they hit a wall, and then you'll hear them feel sorry for themselves and why everything can't happen, and why, because they're just in that constant internal pressure. And then they demand, God, why don't you rescue me? Why don't you rescue me? And they want God. They're demanding of God to act in a certain way. And when he doesn't, they're just more furious, and more anger rises up in their expression. And so they find themselves doing a lot of things that are just even really not that important. They get lost in busy work, distracted work. Might be just constant cleaning, fixing, arranging. It might be just doing certain paperwork. Things are just not important, not priority, but better to do that than deal with anything. And in addition, they avoid interactions or situations that are outside of their role, because a perfectionist has a certain role that they thrive in. Maybe they're a good business person, a good speaker, a good teacher. Get them outside of that, and their goofiness comes through, and it's very, very frightening. Perfectionists in avoidance, they avoid challenges. They'll avoid something that's going to make them seem like a failure. They don't like those moments where they look vulnerable. So they can be uptight. They can be uptight about things, don't really do things, have fun, don't try new things, don't try new steps, because they don't want to be seen in a weak light or in a way that, they could even laugh at themselves at. And this is a really foundational thing of avoidance that I had to learn in my life, is there's avoidance of intimacy. Now, this can be healed in your life, in your journey. You can experience a lot more fruitfulness and actually appreciate intimate, close connection, because many perfectionists want it, but they avoid it when it happens, and they disqualify it. These people they're just not up to my level. That expectation comes in, right? Or you find ways to disqualify people very, very easily, very, very quickly. And rather than learning to appreciate your own flaws and weaknesses and other people's flaws and weaknesses, because intimacy, vulnerability is terrifying for perfectionists. So this creates a lot of patterns of avoidance. Now, perfectionists will distract themselves from their own pain by critiquing and criticizing other people. It's like out of how they see themselves, they transpose it on others, and it's easier to just be distracted in critiquing other people rather than facing your own brokenness. Because the more you face your own brokenness, it actually leads you to be kinder and more gracious to others in a meaningful way, because you see yourself and your pain and what you need. So it leads you to then offering that towards others. Many perfectionists might even spend a lot of time fixing others, right? Helping, pleasing, fixing other people to avoid themselves. And this is a great statement I want to encourage you in. A lot of times the focus of perfection, it's an avoidance. They focus on trying to be good, right? Rather than learning to be loved. They focus on trying to be, I think this is a statement I want to say Dr. Townsend had mentioned, something to this extent, and it's powerful, it's awesome, that we look at things as like good versus, because then perfectionists, it's like good or evil, then it's black and white. And so then we're in constant enemy to ourselves, and we're constantly trying to make things good. And in connection with God, it's actually learning to be loved first. We love him because he first loved us. And I want to learn how to receive that love from him. And so I shifted my journey trying to be good, to wait, let's set the foundation of being loved, because out of that, transformation happens. It's happen. It will happen. But we skip past the love stage. So do you find you focus so much on looking at yourself through a good evil kind of perspective, but you're always disqualified, right? So get out of that range. Stop trying to be good enough, because God sent his son not because we were good enough, because our good enough is never going to measure a standard to the holiness and righteousness of God. But out of his great love for us, sent an atonement for the covering and for a healing for a transformation, for a redemption of our sins, of our struggles. And so while we were sinners, God demonstrated his love towards us. So take that. That's helped me tremendously, just that thought. You may, in your perfectionism, I found in the early stages especially, I became obsessive with trying to fix myself rather than like the previous statement that I mentioned about learning to be loved, because I couldn't handle seeing these flaws. So I would perfectionistly go after, what do I got to do? What do I got to do? What do I got to do? Because I couldn't take looking at myself in these broken places of my life. So we keep the mask on. Perfectionists will keep that persona, the presentation of how you present yourself, right? Because you got that presentation that you do things right. You do things just right. You make sure that everything's just right. But underneath is shame, and the shame drives it, right? Because you think you got to make sure to keep this up to be loved. And it's incredibly tormenting and steals your peace. So healing is going to be challenging at this fight or flight. And I'm going to say here, fight and flight. Healing is challenging because you're always in some kind of disturbed, and relationship isn't grown in fight and flight. So we have to learn to recalibrate our stress response so we can start dealing with our brokenness and walking through it step by step, layer by layer. And I found in the perfectionism journey, perfectionists, they really struggle to be themselves. They don't feel safe to be themselves. So I want to give you a couple thoughts. I hope that I was able to give you some discernment today. I want to give you a couple thoughts. Some of this is things I say over and over and over again in the healing journey and healing your stress response specifically. I'm assuming that you want this, okay? Because I would have to establish a bunch of other things, okay? That you're gonna have to hit some walls. You're gonna have to realize, okay, I gotta operate new pathways. I want to go on the journey. There's all those kinds of things. But here's some very simple things you can begin to practice. The first one is start to see yourself instead of from a view of what needs to be fixed or what needs to be different or better or just right. Start looking at yourself through the lens of compassion, as you would if somebody else had your same battles, your same struggles, and look at somebody you love dearly. And how would you react with them if you're in that place of love? And give that to yourself. This journey of compassion is learning to see ourselves the way that God sees us. He's full of compassion, full of tender mercy. But deep down inside, perfectionists believe God is disappointed with them. He doesn't love them. He's kind of irritated with them. If anything, he just tolerates you. And so self-compassion moves us away from that shame-based perspective, which doesn't heal. Shame never leads you into healing, that kind of shame perspective. And so we're going to move towards a new perspective that now takes practice. I have to practice this on a regular basis, where I catch myself being unkind to myself. And realizing, okay, this isn't about quickly changing what I'm looking at and dealing with. It's more about changing how I'm seeing it. And what I need is compassion. Does it make a big difference when you look at someone else and you look at them through judgment, right? It makes you accuse. It makes you get into wanting to throw stones at them. When you have compassion, you still see it, but there's a graciousness by which you see. This is what I'm encouraging you to see within yourself. And maybe what you need is taking advantage of my resource, God Loves Me, and I Love Myself, because that helped reveal that tough times in my life brought out I did not relate to myself in a healthy way. I did not relate to myself in a fruitful and healthy way. And I feel that God really began to show that to me in some of the toughest seasons of my life. And perfectionists get more angry, more pressurized, and it's time to relate to themselves in a new way. In many ways, you're learning to reparent yourself. You're learning to be the parent to yourself in certain areas that you didn't receive. And it's learning to let God be a father to us and let God reparent us in areas of our life. Another thing I would say is ask yourself the question, what pain am I avoiding or trying to run from? What are the areas that I'm just like, hoping it goes away? I'm just like, yeah, get over it. Is it trauma? Is it unhealed trauma? Is it neglect? Where you realize from the get-go early on there was a lack of you being equipped emotionally. And what I want to encourage in all of this is that you bring, I use this term, bringing the RPMs down. That's, was it revolutions per minute or something like that? It's just where when you get your car going and you got two gauges. One is your miles per hour, or if you're in Europe, kilometers. But then there's the RPMs of how much the engine is cycling and putting in that energy for the trip, right? And it's unhealthy to put the pedal to the metal the whole drive and redline the car. Eventually, you're gonna have some problems and some trouble, right? So in your own journey, I'm encouraging perfectionists, just start bringing the RPMs down. Take a few more breaths. Slow down just a bit more. There's a book that I read that you may find this to be helpful for your life and your journey. In fact, there's things that he's written in this book that has inspired a number of pathways that I've taken on my own to develop and learn in my own journey. It's called Complex PTSD: From Surviving to Thriving by Pete Walker. It's a very extensive writing on complex trauma. And many perfectionists have come out of complex trauma and out of that chaos and or neglect, they develop their perfectionistic tendencies. And one of the things he said in this statement in this book that I want to mention is he says a statement that you have to reverse this constant doing. There's this statement we often say where we'll say, don't just stand there, do something, right? We're just always in that do something. And part of the compassionate journey is learning to slow down and even pause. And he says this statement you may need to reverse. He said, don't just do something. Stand there. And I think that's an interesting statement because there's times where we need to learn to just stand there versus rushing to do something. We want to quickly take control. We want to quickly wrap our arms and our hands around something. We want to quickly run to fixing versus taking a moment to just stand. I mean, even the Bible says, when you've done all to stand, stand therefore. There's many times where it's not about you getting into this driven, pressurized go mode. It's standing. Just stand. Just hold your ground. You're having a stress response. You're having a panic attack. You're having a shame attack, and you learn how to ride through it. Obsession screaming at you. You learn how to ride through it and experience love. I don't need to do anything right now, and I'm practicing learning to be loved for who I am without compulsively chasing these things. Right? And so we learn in the moment to lean into sometimes stillness, to the quiet. That when stress arises, we learn to pause, even if it's just for a moment, rather than rushing into it and gearing up constantly. So the last thing I want to encourage you in, when you're healing your stress response, we have to learn a shift. And another shift that I want to encourage, we have to shift how we see flaws and weaknesses. Perfectionists see it from a place of disdain, a place of contempt, bitterness, self-hate. We have to learn to see these places from a standpoint of healing and learning. I'm going to learn from these areas in my life. These are not areas to run from. These are not areas to avoid. These are areas that I'm going to learn in my life. They're a part of my journey. So then we begin to appreciate strengths, weaknesses, victories, defeats. It's all a part of the mix of your journey. And you know what's interesting? I find there's great learning in mistakes that we can find if we'll look compassionately at them. So where do you find to be helpful in your own journey? Take a moment to comment. Send me some feedback on what's been helpful for your journey. What did I say today that made sense for you, that rang a bell in a good way? If it's been a blessing, please share this with others. Go to markdejesus.com. You can support the materials by clicking on the donate button. You can send a one-time donation or become a regular supporter. I'm just happy to be a brother from another mother to speak into your life and to your journey. If I've been a blessing to you in any way, it's an absolute honor. So until next time, Lord willing, and the creek don't rise, this is your brother from another mother saying, I'll see you next time. But in the meantime, I'm out.